Have you ever poured your soul into a prayer, pleading for guidance, searching desperately for a sign, only to be met with nothing but quiet? Maybe you once lost something you cherished deeply and found yourself staring at the ceiling, asking God why. Maybe you gave your time, your energy, your trust. You kept believing, kept hoping, yet your life stayed exactly the same. Or perhaps you're standing in that lonely space right now, where faith feels less like a conversation and more like speaking into endless space. If you've ever whispered in the dark, "Are you listening at all? Does any of this matter?" Then this story is meant for you. Because long ago, there was a man who watched his world fall apart. His prayers didn't bring quick answers. They didn't bring relief. They seemed to disappear into the air, unanswered and unseen, until one unexpected encounter with a simple gardener reshaped his understanding of belief itself. What he discovered among soil and seeds will change the way you think about unanswered prayers, long silences, and the painful seasons where waiting feels unbearable. Stay with me until the very end, because this lesson may be exactly what your heart needs. In a small, peaceful village where everyone shared both laughter and loss, lived a man named James. He was 35 years old, known by many, respected by most. Faith had always been the foundation of his life. He never missed a weekly service. He showed up when his neighbors were in need. He taught his children to believe in kindness, honesty, and hope, even when life tested those beliefs again and again. James had always believed that faith worked like an agreement. If you lived honestly, if you believed deeply, if you prayed faithfully, then God would keep you safe. Protection, in his mind, was the reward for devotion. But life was about to show him that faith was never meant to work that way. Everything began the year his wife, Sarah, became seriously ill. It wasn't sudden, but it was relentless, a mysterious, long-term condition that doctors couldn't clearly explain. Appointments followed appointments. Tests led to more tests. Each visit ended with uncertainty and another bill. Every morning, James prayed beside their bed. "Please heal her," he whispered. "We're trying to live right. We're doing what we're supposed to do. Please, don't let this get worse." But it did. Sarah's strength faded, her pain increased, and the medical expenses piled up week after exhausting week. Then, 6 months into her illness, another blow came. The factory James had worked at for 12 years shut its doors without warning. No slow decline, no transition. One day it existed. The next day, it was gone. Just like that, his paycheck vanished. Now there was no job, only debt, only fear, only responsibility pressing down on his chest. James prayed with a desperation he had never known before. "Please," he begged, "I need work. My family depends on me. I'm doing everything I can. I still believe in you. Why is my life falling apart?" Days passed, then weeks, then months. No phone calls, no job offers. The savings he had carefully built over years nearly disappeared. And then came the call that broke whatever strength he had left. His mother had died suddenly, a heart attack. No warning, no final conversation, no goodbye. That night, James stood alone in his backyard. The sky above him was dark and empty. His wife lay sick upstairs. His mother was gone forever. His money was almost gone, and his prayers felt like they had never reached anyone at all. He stared into the darkness and spoke words that once felt impossible. "I did everything I was told to do. I believed, I prayed, I trusted, and still, you left me." His voice cracked as the question escaped his lips. "Why do I keep believing, if believing changes nothing?" James dropped to his knees, not in worship, but in complete surrender. The dirt pressed into his hands as tears fell freely. "I'm done," he whispered. "I don't have the strength to believe anymore." Yet something inside James refused to let go completely. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe, buried deep beneath the anger, it was the final spark of hope that hadn't gone out yet. When morning came, he got out of bed, pulled on his coat, and walked toward the old monastery at the far edge of the village. If he was truly going to walk away from faith, he wanted to say it out loud, to someone who wouldn't dismiss his pain or offer empty answers. That person was Brother Thomas. The old monk had lived at the monastery for as long as anyone could remember. 70 years old, with hands rough and scarred from decades of working the soil, Brother Thomas had survived war, hunger, grief, and loss. Yet somehow, through it all, he carried a calm that never seemed forced, a quiet steadiness that nothing appeared able to shake. When James arrived, Brother Thomas was already in the garden. Kneeling low, he gently pressed soil around a row of fragile seedlings, moving slowly, as if time itself had softened around him. "Brother Thomas," James said, his voice trembling with rage and heartbreak, "I need an answer. Tell me, does God even exist? Because if he does, then he clearly doesn't care about me." The old monk lifted his head and studied James for a long moment. There was no shock in his eyes, no judgment, only patience. "Sit with me," Brother Thomas said quietly. James dropped onto a worn wooden bench nearby, and the dam inside him finally broke. He spoke of Sarah's illness, how no one could explain it, of the job that vanished overnight, of the bills that piled higher each week, of his mother's sudden death, of prayers whispered through tears that seemed to disappear into nothing. "I did everything I was supposed to do," James shouted. "I believed. I prayed. I tried to live right. And this is what I get? I have to watch my family suffer while God says nothing?" He gestured sharply toward the garden. "You kneel here, planting seeds and praying like the world makes sense. But you don't understand. Real life isn't gentle. It's brutal." His voice dropped, bitter and tired. "Faith is just a story we tell ourselves to survive the pain. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't change anything." Brother Thomas didn't interrupt. He didn't correct him. He didn't offer scripture or explanations. Instead, he slowly stood up, brushed the dirt from his palms, and looked at James with calm certainty. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I want you to see." Brother Thomas led James deeper into the monastery grounds, to a corner of the garden divided into 4 clearly separated sections. Each plot told a different story, different soil, different growth, different stages of life. "I want to show you something most people never understand about faith," Brother Thomas said softly. "Something suffering alone cannot teach you." They stopped at the first plot. The earth was dark and freshly turned, no flowers. Brother Thomas smiled softly, almost sadly. "These little shoots," he said, "are living through the most difficult moment of their entire existence." He pressed his fingers gently into the soil. "To them, this ground feels like solid stone. Every bit of strength they have is being spent on one thing, breaking through." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Do you know why most seeds never make it past this stage?" He looked at James. "Because this moment demands everything. One final surge. Many give up right here, just inches before reaching the light." His gaze held James's. "Does that sound familiar?" They moved on to the third plot. Here, the plant stood taller and stronger. Leaves glowed a healthy green. Small buds had begun to form, tight and patient, waiting. "These were planted 2 months ago," Brother Thomas said. "What stage would you say they're in?" "They're almost ready," James replied quietly. "Almost ready to bloom." "Yes," the monk nodded. Strong roots below, solid stems above, buds forming exactly as they should. Everything is right, but the flowers haven't opened yet. He fell silent for a moment. "This is the stage where impatience creeps in," Brother Thomas continued. "We look at our lives and say, 'Why not now? I've waited long enough. I've done the work.' But the plant knows something we often forget." He touched one of the unopened buds. "Forced blossoms are fragile. If they open too soon, they don't last. So the bud waits. 'Not yet,' it says. 'Soon, but not yet.'" Finally, they stood before the fourth plot. It was alive with color. Deep reds, bright yellows, rich purples. The air was sweet with fragrance. Bees drifted lazily from flower to flower, as if the garden itself was breathing. "These," Brother Thomas said, "were planted 5 months ago." James stood frozen, unable to speak. Brother Thomas turned to him, his weathered face filled with quiet compassion. 4 plots," he said. "The same seeds, the same soil." "Sarah's illness," Brother Thomas said gently, "is teaching both of you something you could not have learned any other way. Your job loss is not punishment, it is redirection, even if you cannot see where it leads yet. And your mother's passing is not the end of her love." He paused. "That love still lives, in you, in your children, like seeds she planted long ago, now growing quietly in ways you don't yet recognize." He scooped a handful of soil and let it fall slowly through his fingers. A seed never curses the darkness that surrounds it. It doesn't rage against the soil for being heavy and cold. It uses that darkness to send down its very first root. He looked at James steadily. "Your pain is not evidence that God has abandoned you. It may be the very ground where your deepest growth is taking place." Brother Thomas raised a second finger. "Second, Faith is choosing to water what you cannot yet see. He gestured back toward the first plot. Every morning, I water that ground. To anyone passing by, it looks foolish, a man pouring water onto empty dirt. He smiled faintly. But I'm not watering soil. I'm watering seeds that are working silently beneath the surface. He turned to James. Your prayers are not wasted. They are not disappearing into silence. They are nourishing transformation you don't yet have eyes to see. Keep praying, he said softly. Keep believing when nothing seems to change, especially when nothing seems to change. Because faith is not about instant results. It is about trusting the process that unfolds in the dark. Then he held up a third finger. Third, real faith is active trust. It keeps planting, even after disappointment. He swept his hand across the garden. Over the years, some seeds I planted never sprouted. Some plants I cared for were destroyed by storms. Some sections failed entirely. He looked back at James. But I never stopped planting. I never stopped tending the soil. Because faith is not about guarantees. It's about believing that the act of planting itself matters, even when individual seeds do not survive. Brother Thomas's voice softened. You may be standing in the second plot right now, that exhausting moment of breaking through. He leaned closer. What if you are so close that giving up now would be the greatest loss of all? Reaching into his pocket, Brother Thomas pulled out a small cloth pouch and placed it in James's hands. Go home, he said. Plant these in your own garden. Water them every day, even when you see nothing. And while you water, he continued, pray, not asking God to give you flowers tomorrow, but thanking him for the unseen work happening today. James stared at the seeds resting in his trembling palms. Brother Thomas met his eyes. Faith is both simple and difficult. It is planting seeds in soil that looks lifeless, caring for them when there is no evidence of progress, and trusting that growth happens where you cannot see it. He waited. Can you do that, James? The same water. The same gardener. The same care. He paused. The only difference is time and the stage of growth. They walked back to the first plot, the one that still looked empty. James, Brother Thomas said gently, this ground is not failing. It hasn't been abandoned. It isn't dead. He knelt beside the bare soil. God hasn't forgotten these seeds. They are simply in the beginning phase, the invisible phase. He brushed the earth with care. If I stopped watering this plot today just because I don't see flowers yet, then it truly would die. The seed would dry out. The fragile root would wither. He looked toward the blooming garden. But if I keep tending it, keep trusting the process, keep caring even when nothing is visible, it will become that. Brother Thomas returned to the bench and motioned for James to sit beside him. Now listen carefully, he said. I want to teach you 3 truths about real faith, the kind that survives when everything else collapses. He held up one finger. First, faith is not believing that God will take away your suffering. Faith is trusting that God is still working within your suffering. He gestured back toward the garden. Every plot passes through the invisible stage, every single one. He turned to James, and right now, your life feels like that first plot. Nothing to show, no proof, only silence. He placed a hand over the soil. But beneath the surface of your pain, something is happening. Seeds are swelling, roots are forming, and life is quietly preparing to rise. No green, nothing but bare soil stretching across the ground. I planted seeds here 1 week ago, the monk said. Tell me, James, what do you see? James stared at the empty dirt. Nothing, he replied. Just soil. Exactly, Brother Thomas nodded. That's all the surface shows. Then he knelt down and carefully brushed aside the top layer of earth. Hidden beneath, almost invisible to the untrained eye, was a seed. Swollen, split open with a tiny white root beginning to push its way outward. Look closely, Brother Thomas said. The seed has already begun to change. Inside the darkness, unseen, it was absorbing water. Cells were dividing. The hard shell was breaking down. Life had already started its work. But if you judge only by what's visible, he gestured toward the empty plot, you would assume nothing is happening. You might even believe the seed has failed. He looked at James. But it isn't dead. It's growing where you cannot see it, in the dark. They walked to the second plot. These were planted 3 weeks ago, Brother Thomas said. What do you notice now? James studied the ground carefully. At first glance, nothing. Then he leaned closer. Tiny green shoots had begun to break through the soil, fragile, barely there, no taller than a fingernail. I see something, James said slowly. It's very small, almost nothing. Brother Thomas smiled gently. James tightened his grip around the seeds and gave a slow nod. Tears ran freely down his face, not of despair this time, but of release. That very afternoon, he returned home and knelt in the small patch of earth behind his house. With his hands in the dirt, he planted the seeds one by one. It felt almost absurd. His world was still unstable. Nothing had magically improved. And yet, there he was, planting flowers. But something inside him had shifted. That night, James knelt beside the newly turned soil and prayed in a way he never had before. There were no demands, no negotiations, no desperate bargains. I don't understand what you're doing, he whispered into the quiet, but I'm choosing to trust that you are doing something, even if I can't see it yet. And then he kept going. Every morning, James watered the soil. Some days he felt hopeful, other days empty and exhausted. But he watered it anyway, day after day, week after week. The ground stayed bare. But James was not. 2 weeks later, while scrolling through job listings, James noticed an opening at a small manufacturing company. It wasn't in his field. The pay was lower than before. It wasn't what he had imagined for himself. But something inside him stirred, a quiet voice, echoing Brother Thomas's words. Apply. So he did. 3 days later, he received the call. They offered him the job. It wasn't the breakthrough he wanted, but it was a beginning. A tiny green shoot, barely visible, pushing its way through the soil. Sarah's illness didn't suddenly disappear. The symptoms remained. The uncertainty stayed. But something unexpected grew in its place. The hardship forced James and Sarah to talk in ways they hadn't for years. They slowed down. They noticed small moments, holding hands in silence, watching the sky change colors at sunset, laughing at things that once would have gone unnoticed. One evening, Sarah looked at him and said softly, I don't know why this is happening to us. I'm still afraid. But somehow, I feel like we're becoming who we were meant to be because of this. Does that make any sense? James thought of the first plot, the seeds changing shape in the darkness. Yes, he said. It makes perfect sense. At work, James showed up quietly and consistently. He didn't complain. He helped others. He worked with honesty and care, even on difficult days. His manager noticed. 4 months after James started, he was called into the office. His chest tightened. The old fear returned. Was this happening again? James, the manager said, I've been watching how you work, your attitude, your discipline, the way you treat people, especially while clearly carrying something heavy. He paused. We're expanding. I want you to oversee our new production line. It's more responsibility, and it pays more than your previous job ever did. James sat still, stunned. Another seed, now breaking fully into the light. James remained seated, unable to speak. The job he once believed was a downgrade had quietly become an open door. That evening, 5 months after planting the seeds Brother Thomas had given him, James stepped into his backyard and froze. The small patch of land, the one he had watered faithfully every single morning while seeing absolutely nothing, had changed. Flowers had erupted from the soil. Bright, alive, bursting with color. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, just as he had on that hopeless night months ago when he believed faith had failed him. But this time, his heart was different. He wasn't broken. He wasn't angry. He whispered through tears, You were here the whole time, working, waiting, growing things I couldn't see. The following week, Sarah's doctor called them in. This time, the tone was different, careful but hopeful. After months of uncertainty, the doctors had finally identified her condition clearly. With the right treatment plan, the outlook was far better than they had once feared. I can't promise it will be easy, the doctor said, but there is real hope now. James and Sarah held each other and wept. Not because all the pain had disappeared, not because life had suddenly become simple, but because they finally understood. Faith was never about escaping the darkness. It was about trusting that something meaningful was growing within it. The next Sunday morning, James returned to the monastery garden. Brother Thomas was there, as always, quietly tending the soil. Brother Thomas, James said softly, I need to show you something. He pulled out his phone and showed photos of his backyard, the flowers in full bloom. The old monk smiled, slow and warm. You've learned, he said. James nodded. I learned that faith isn't about getting what I want, when I want it, he replied. It's about trusting that God is at work, even when I can't see a single sign, especially when I can't see anything at all. Brother Thomas placed a weathered hand on James's shoulder. Now, he said gently, you understand what I could never have explained with words alone. You had to take the first step. You had to plant what looked lifeless. You had to return every day and water it. You had to wait without proof. You had to trust without certainty. And now, you've seen it for yourself. What is holy does not rush. What is sacred often grows where no one is looking. Life begins in the dark. My friend, if you are walking through a season where your prayers feel unanswered, if you've shown up again and again and nothing seems to be changing, if you've ever wondered whether God hears you at all, listen closely. Faith is not believing that God will hand you what you ask for. Faith is trusting that God is at work beneath the surface long before you see the result. A seed buried in soil looks lifeless, but it is not dead. It is transforming, forming roots, gathering strength, preparing quietly for the moment it rises into the light. Remember these three truths. First, your pain is not evidence of God's absence. It may be the very ground where your deepest growth is taking place. Every garden passes through a season where nothing is visible. You are not lost. You are not late. You may be standing in plot 1 or plot 2, and growth is happening, even if your eyes cannot see it yet. Second, keep watering what you cannot see. Keep praying. Keep believing. Keep showing up. Not when it feels easy, but especially when it feels pointless, because the most important growth often happens during the quiet, unseen hours. Third, you may be closer to breakthrough than you realize. The moment a seed pushes through the soil is the most exhausting part of its journey. What if you are right there? What if quitting now means missing the bloom by days? Your waiting is not wasted. Your prayers have not disappeared. Your silent nights are not empty. Something is growing, hidden beneath the surface, in the darkness, building roots strong enough to one day hold beauty. And one morning, sooner or later, you will wake up and find flowers where there was once only dirt. And you will understand God was there the entire time, working, preparing, growing what you could not yet see. That is faith, not believing because you see the flower, but watering the soil when all you see is dirt, trusting that something sacred is still at work. If this story spoke to your heart, if you needed to hear that your waiting has meaning, share it with someone who is walking through their invisible season. Leave a comment and tell me, which plot are you in right now? Plot 1, 2, 3, or 4? You are not alone in the waiting. I'll be back next week with another story to strengthen your faith. Until then, remember this: faith is not certainty. Faith is devotion in the dark. Keep watering, my friend. Keep trusting. The bloom is coming.